So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our weekly Wednesday webinar, and particular welcome to Professor Werner Cordier, who is guest presenter for today, continuing on his exploration of using AI tools and different approaches to teaching of pharmacology, which we're saying you could probably extrapolate to just about every subject that we are involved in teaching. You know, us pharmacology people always say we straddle the boundaries. Some people think it's a basic science and other people think it's a clinical science, and we're saying it is a science. So Werner, welcome. Thank you so much for starting us off last week, and we're looking very forward to hearing how it pans out in a practical sense this week. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Given last week's discussions, I decided just to showcase a bunch of practical things that can be done using AI. To acknowledge it, there are some of these which does require you to have the paid for version of ChatGPT, but some of it is also things that can be quite easily developed. Some of it uses free alternatives. And actually with some of these, I mean, there's a multitude of new AI devices out there. So within the coming weeks, everything changes. I am not entirely sure when it happened, but as far as I can see over the weekend, Notebook LM had an update, which created something new, which I want to showcase. So it just goes to show how quickly this field does change, making it very interesting to kind of keep ahead of the curve. So what I want to show you is just pretty much some of the things that I've developed for a variety of purposes. So some of these were based on my own necessity. Others was, as I mentioned, it was playing around. So you kind of just did it because you were bored and tried to see what the limits is of what something can do. And then others were based on some requests that I had from colleagues who wanted to just simplify their administration. But two of the things that I want to target predominantly, though, a bit later is the link to research practice, because I know last week there was quite a bit of concern about students using AI to write documents for them. And I share that concern a lot. And I want to, for one, show you what's possible using it, just to maybe scare you about how accurate it can be, but then also show you possibly how you can flip that on its head to make it a proper learning opportunity, which within the culture of ethics might mean that you can at least decrease the impact on critical thinking detriments. So I'm going to start off sequentially with maybe the more administrative matters in mind. Some of the things that typically bog us down at the end of the day, things such as the general monitoring and evaluation that we need to do, a lot of the questions that we may receive from students and so forth. So maybe just by show of hands or reactions, how many of you on a typical basis get queries from students about where's the lecture, when is the test, while full knowing that everything is in your module guide? I am not alone. My personal view on this matter is that very often students do it because it is the easier route, but also I think sometimes there is that want for more human interaction within the discussion, or at least some level of discussion taking place. So one of the things that we've developed is a module chatbot. So this was developed in ChatGPT. You have to have the paid version to get access to its GPT creator. And I'll just quickly show how this looks in the back end after I show you how it works. But for contextualization, the module that's being presented here, FAR 382, is a module which is quite broad. It's presented to physiotherapists, to nurses, and to students from the BSc degree programs. So there's a multitude of people in here. We've got those in the basic sciences and those within professional degrees. So it does become quite complex. And what complicates it even more is that there's a lot of information in the module guide, but people don't always look at the module guide. And then naturally we get overwhelmed with emails just asking routine questions that they should already know. So this was merely provided there as a way to help elaborate on the module guide, full well knowing that the students aren't always going to refer to it. So even though they instructed the module guide as law, this is really just there for those kind of snapshot moments, and then they can always refer back to it. So for example, I have some cues here at the start. So what do I need to pass the module? And Bob's your uncle, it's going to spit out the minimum requirements. So you can see it's saying searching my knowledge, because it's built on the actual elements of FAR 382. So it's not going to refer to any websites. It's built on the documents that I've uploaded. So based on the criteria, your final mark requirement is listed. It also then provides examination admission details, and it also presents an assessment breakdown for you. Additionally, it gives you details on the supplementary examinations. And what it will also do, it will cross-reference that to our University of Pretoria examination guidelines for whether or not there's maybe a contextual thing that pops up. And even the faculty guidelines, because some programs often have a little bit of a tweak here and there. So if I were to ask, for example, who are the lecturers of the module, it will then pop out all the information for it. So it's myself and my colleagues. We can also ask, where do classes take place? And it will pop out the relevant information. So the nice thing about this is that it really does provide quick and easy information, because I think students in the broad scheme of things become overwhelmed with just the complexity of things. To also be devil's advocate, I don't think each program is designed the same way. So sometimes you have something very structured and then something maybe not so structured. And that tends to create confusion about, should you really refer to the module guide, should you not? So using something like this, it just helps to at least acutely remedy those on-the-spot questions that students may have. At present, this is the first semester that we've rolled it out, and we haven't gotten any complaints as of yet or any recommendations for improvement. And we're actively pushing this to remedy acute queries that students may have. And what I can say as module coordinator, we have received a lot less queries at this stage than what we typically do. So I'm seeing that as a hopeful nod that, nothing potentially bad is happening. What I think is also quite relevant for students is that all of our modules are sometimes seen in isolation. So for example, maybe just by reaction, or if you want to maybe mention something about this, how many of you sometimes get the impression or maybe the direct feedback that students don't know why your specific module fits into the greater scheme of the program? I see Michelle says that she's often in a similar boat, Shira as well. So some of the complexity that I have is pharmacology is presented to physiotherapists, nurses, and in the first semester to dietitians. For the nurses, it's very clear cut and dry where they need it. For the physiotherapists, on the other hand, although they can see rationality with that, often because of the overload of information, because the curriculum requires revamping, they don't immediately see the value and purpose. BSc students, because they don't have any clinical application for it, it also tends to become murky. So what we've also done with this chatbot is to say, let's link it to the national scope of practice, the actual standards for those specific professionals, and our SAQA and CHE documentation, because then it provides further emphasis that should they ask the questions, they do get some insight. So for example, why do I as physiotherapists need pharmacology? Or let's say need to take this module. And it should spit out exactly why. It supports patient care, it aligns with national qualifications, and it's a scope of practice expectation. So very brief and succinctly, it can help position this. And we have something similar built for a dentistry module and for an oral hygiene module. And the hope is that with time, we can elaborate on this further to bring in a lot more research, a lot more personal experiences, case reports, and so forth, so that students also get this broad breadth of the importance of that for their careers. So they never sit in that awkward gap of not really understanding the purpose. For this specific modules, we've also uploaded some practice questions, because one of the typical frustrations of students is that they don't understand how to answer questions or how to study. So for example, what are the typical concerns for learning? Typical issues that they face: the volume of the content with a tip to organize, the application of knowledge with a tip to practice applying concepts in clinical questions, to integrate physiology and pathophysiology, because a lot of our students struggle to see the greater system effect, memorization from understanding, anxiety, and so forth. And all of these are discussed within the documents that we've uploaded. It even refers to the prepare, engage, and consolidate framework, which forms part of our UP teaching philosophy. I can also ask, do you have recommendations to study adverse effects? And it will pop up some of the recommendations we've made into our documents. So focus on patterns, not lists. Emphasis here is getting once again to the understanding of underlying physiological systems and then linking it to different mechanisms using mnemonics. It's not really a favorite of mine, but a lot of the students use it and with varying success and practicing clinical scenarios. So in doing so, it also helps to bypass a lot of the typical questions that we would get. And I'm sure that many of you also have maybe a template on the back end where you kind of just copy paste the routine standard recommendations you would give for studying. We can even say, give me a practice question. So from our knowledge bank, it will now draw a couple of practice questions and modify it a little bit. For example, here, a patient is being treated with a first-generation antihistamine, gets a report of drowsiness and dry mouth. Please explain the pharmacological basis for it. And it will provide a model answer. The system is also trained so that when students insert their own answer, it will provide a level of feedback to say that this is a superficial answer, its terminology is incorrect, and so forth. That aspect is very brief. And we do acknowledge to the students they shouldn't be using this as a primary way to gauge their assessment, because it's something we do need to develop and get stronger. But at a baseline level, it provides some level of interaction so that they can get some level of immediate feedback, which is one of the areas where they generally have concerns. Now, something like this is not really too difficult to actually generate. So I'm just going to open up the back end of the system. So this is how you would typically see a GPT in its back end. And when it boils down to it, a GPT is really just a high level of instructions. So in your instructions, I've provided everything that this GPT needs to understand. It is designed for the Pharmacology 302 module. It's presented to the following students. The National Qualifications Framework level is at 7. And I provided with all the relevant information, how it should respond to students following a specific structure, that it should not provide any guidance outside of the uploaded materials, the tone that it should maintain, that it should avoid general web searches, for example. And then also within its knowledge base, I've uploaded all the relevant documents that it needs to refer to at the end of the day. And in doing so, it then has a core level of information that it can draw from to answer any questions. This development maybe took me around half an hour and maybe an additional 30 minutes of playing around just to see whether or not answers were accurate. When I included my colleagues after that initial phase, it was an additional 30 minutes, I would say. So the system isn't 100% perfect. An error might slip through here and there, but it's a low-risk error in my opinion. But the simple fact is that this was a low time investment matter, which with hope is going to decrease a lot of the daily queries we may receive, not only in terms of module administration, but also with general study guidance. So is this something that, for example, you can see working well within your systems, or something that can be extrapolated to that? And feel free to pop up your mic as well. One of the reasons I showcase this first is because as much as I think we always want to hit the highest level of teaching and learning and assessment, we rarely are able to do so if we're continuously bogged down just by email queries and admin and so forth. So my general opinion about practical application of AI has always been, see what a computer can do for you and get something to do that. Then the amount of time you can spend just creating a system that automatically analyzes things for you can really save time. Shira?
Thanks. This is really exciting. It's really nice to think about ways to reduce admin. And I think it's something that course coordinators really should take on board and not just say, oh, well, the students can work it out from the course guide and send them further. I do want to know to what extent you've engaged in collaboration about this, because you're saying it would be fine if a course coordinator got a paid version of ChatGPT and made as many ChatGPT bots as necessary for the courses. But we've been looking, we've got departments who are now investing in like 40 or 50,000 Rand a year server kind of based bots that are working with their content. And then as a sort of smaller side, they've got the admin as part of that. Now, the question for me is, what's a better cost-benefit ratio? If you've got, I don't know, 20 course coordinators buying their own GPT licenses, not buying their own, that we get paid for versions, versus looking at the bigger picture. And do you see us having like a pharmacology university-wide bot for anybody who's teaching any kind of whatever your topic is, or would we have a med bot that all the subjects could be part of, and you just have a like control committee? How do you see it happening?
So a couple of points there. With regards to cost benefit, I think the most important thing here is to really investigate what you need to do. So for example, with one of the things I'm going to show you now, doing that on ChatGPT with a paid version is sufficient in my opinion. You can build it much, much, much stronger and incredibly well with a lot more integration throughout. But from is the lemon with the squeeze type of discussion? Not necessarily. I don't think it's really worthwhile to go into such extensive processes for that to happen. But for other things, I would say there needs to be a strong collaborative base to get this up and running with full accuracy. So for example, building a virtual tutor is not something you can do just with something as simplistic as this, because the knowledge base, for example, this module guide has a maximum of 20 documents, which would be grossly insufficient for a complicated module. So the more documents you also upload, the slower the system is going to be able to run, and the more cross-referencing errors may pop up. So for example, what I'm doing back at home is we're working with the Department of Computer Sciences, specifically our AppSot chair for AI. And the hope is to set up a collaboration there where they can assist us with building stronger server-based systems. And my technical knowledge is going to be very, very inexperienced here. But in essence, it boils down to using OpenAI's backend to the fullest of its capabilities, but a lot of the knowledge base is run through servers that are self-developed. So it pretty much feeds all of that information through OpenAI without it necessarily being housed with OpenAI, which allows for a stronger retention and acquisition of knowledge without all of the errors that may seep through. We're building something like a bot that can spread beyond borders. I think it depends once again on what you need. So I would say if you're building a bot for medical doctors, for example, which encompasses broad disciplines, having a singular one would be difficult to build because of the complexity thereof. But if you're building it for a singular discipline, it might be a lot easier to do. I would say you need to use judicial thinking here to see where's that boundary that you can have. It does become complicated because the more expansive it becomes, the more issues you might see with the knowledge base it has and the ability it has to make logical deductions between all of those documents. I would not advise stepping into a lot of these complicated things without having somebody with a lot of technical background in it. What I'm showing you now, for the most part, is not really that technical heavy. So these are things I've developed, even though I've got maybe a scoosh more experience. But I wouldn't say you need to be an expert on any of these things. I see, Michelle, I think you have a question.
Yes, I would like to know, how do your students access the module bots? Are you providing them with a link?
Yes.
Because I believe they won't have the paid version as you do.
Yeah, it's just a link that I provide. So for example, I can show you the other one that I'm going to pop in now. So this is, for example, one of the GPTs that I've developed. It's called Pharmacology. I share it with the students and they use it. The only flaw with this, and this is where I really need that collaboration that I was speaking about with people from computer science, I want to integrate this within the learning management system. So at this stage, the students use it and you have absolutely no idea how they use it. But if we're able to see how they engage with it, we can get that learning analytics and see that, for example, if students are continuously asking, where's the venue? is this something that we're not communicating to them properly, or is this, an organic question? If they're asking the same type of question about how do you answer these types of questions, that can feed back into a feedback loop so that we have some iterative conversation. At this stage, we don't have that integration, so it becomes complicated. But if you do it through your LMS, then you also have this lovely way of not only advertising the system, getting analytics from it, but you also strengthen the cohesion between all of these different parts. All that the students need for this is just to log into ChatGPT. So they just need an account, even if it's a free account. On the free account, naturally, they are capped to a certain level of communication per day. So the next one to quickly show you, just also kind of focused on admin before we get maybe to a bit more of the learning things. How many of you have classes larger than 50 students or even 30 students? A lot. So when we get to feedback levels, it's never an issue if you ask people on a scale of 1 to 5, how did you rate this class? Out of a scale from 1 to 5, did you understand the concepts? Getting quantitative feedback is never an issue because all of our response systems can very quickly put up a nice bar chart to show this is where the students are struggling. But the richness, and I'm sure the qualitative researchers will agree with me, is the open-ended discussions, the ones where there's elaborate text, elaborate explanations, but it becomes difficult to figure out how to manage that if you have 50 students giving you responses and the class is in 2 days. I'm sure that nobody here has necessarily the luxury of time to go through all of those bits and bobs. So what we've started doing within our courses already last year is to do weekly surveys with the students. And the main challenge for us was how are we going to analyze easily between 80 and 150 responses per week, at least 3 or 4 different questions. So what we were doing is we leveraged ChatGPT. This was still on the free version, but we've now started using the paid version to be able to analyze all of this for us so that we can just get a snapshot of responses and give very quick high-level feedback to the lecturers. So for example, this was a feedback analysis done on the pharmacodynamics lecture that we gave. We asked a bunch of quantitative questions. So for example, what resources did the students use? So we provide a variety of different things that they can use. We asked them what did they use afterwards to consolidate their knowledge. So we get some level of quantitative feedback on it. And we can see that, for example, if the students aren't really using the videos much, is it because the videos are inappropriate or is it because the videos are just superfluous fluff to them? We also asked them, for example, how did they contribute to their own learning? How did they navigate this learning? What did they struggle with and what were the key takeaway moments for them? And if we look at the breakdown, in terms of contribution to their learning, the students say they focused on the in-class engagement and note-taking, they self-studied, and they went beyond the required materials. What worked well is that the in-class engagement they really enjoyed. They enjoyed the preparation and the clarity of examples and the inclusion of real-life examples. They did recommend, though, more examples and mechanisms of actions to be clarified, some technical issues that popped up. For example, in this session, there was an issue with the mic, if memory serves me correctly, and they talked about pacing improvements. So the typical thing of some students feel it's a bit too fast, others a little bit too slow. But overall, positive tone, minimal dissatisfaction. And the areas that required support were also provided. So from a very high level, and you can change this type of summary as well, you can make it more granular. But immediately after my lecture, within 10 minutes of getting the surveys naturally, I can see what went well, what went wrong. So I've been using this to then provide micro-teaching snippets afterwards. If students had indicated they really struggled, for example, with receptor ligand binding, I popped a quick 5-minute video up of me just discussing the areas in a different format. Or I sourced a Khan Academy video on that specific topic that they can use. In doing so, it immediately allows for a cycle of remediation to take place, which then mitigates that whole end of semester. Now there's this massive amount of things that need to be discussed during your revision session. So this feedback, really, it took minimal amount of time to get through the nuances thereof. And the provision is there that you can provide a lot more feedback to students. And I'm sure that many of you that have been working within the feedback domain have also seen the more of an iterative discussion you have with students, the more they believe that their feedback is also being taken into consideration. So the more likely they are to provide more constructive and higher level feedback as well. And with this, it was just creating a project. So in ChatGPT, you have the potential of creating a project. And in that project, it basically boils down to a high level instruction folder. So for example, you create an instruction very similar like how you would with any general prompt. You can create the instructions, say what it's supposed to do, and what questions are being used, what tone it should have when it's responding, and so forth. You can provide your project files, and then when you analyze it, you just need to very quickly prompt it. The nice thing, for example, with this feedback report is that you can do a longitudinal analysis as well. So for example, when looking at a variety of sessions that we presented, we saw that across the board, lecture notes were continuously being used as well as narrated presentations, while flashcards were very often not used. And if we look at some of the feedback, students continuously said independent studying and attending the classes and using some external resources. They can also see that across the board, that in-class engagement is good, preparatory material was great, and so forth. So if you think about it as a longitudinal analysis, and you do this, for example, each week for your sessions, at the end of your first quarter, you can already say from an interim reporting stage, what is working and not working within your classes over the span of times, not just in that one cross-sectional view. Do you think something like this can aid you in your feedback, at least simplifying your feedback? And once again, what I want to iterate here, setting this up was 20 minutes of work. None of these things that I'm showing you requires programming knowledge. I am not a programmer. I leave that very much in the domain of my husband. My big goal is just what makes life easier. I don't want to say I'm lazy, but I've gotten to the stage where I need to prioritize certain things to maintain balance. And admin is the one area that I'm very keen on dropping. Now, if we get maybe to a little bit of the more interesting learning stuff, so not just admin, which is always the boring elements. Last time there was some discussion of areas of concern about postgraduate studies. How many of you here are actively involved with postgraduate studies? Just by show of hands or reactions, the majority I see. How many of you have a lot of extra time to sit down with your students for supervisory consultations? And when I say this, it's not that you try to do so or you make time for it, but you really have nothing else to do. You can always just sit down for student consultations. And yeah, now I'm expecting to see absolutely no. But one of the biggest gripes that we have within our setting, and I think it's a general academic concern, is that as much as we want to provide that discourse with our students during research supervision, there's not often time. I very much enjoy speaking to my students. I very much like sitting there and asking them, how do you think this works? And having them stutter or impress or challenge me back and so forth with that research topic, because I think that's how learning happens. It's that continuous challenge of back and forth questioning, proving what you understand and don't understand, so that in that relationship you can accurately step in, remediate, strengthen, provide counterpoints and challenges and so forth. Now, a lot of our students unfortunately sit in a position where they're very new within the research space. And because the academics are also busy, it very often happens that a student may wait a long time, or they come to their supervisory sessions eventually, and they unfortunately met with, we only have 10 minutes, let's quickly get through this. Or they've got a lot of questions which are not necessarily high-level questions, really skimming the basis of it. And that's not really where that learning happens. So what I designed here is a GPT based on the principles of Socratic feedback. So Socratic feedback deals with, you ask questions, and in a proper Socratic space, there's no answer ever from any party. It's always just a question back and forth. That's why it's such a philosophically sound form of discourse. But for the purposes of this, I just wanted a system that's able to continuously throw back questions to the student so that they can actively think about how to respond. and then eventually start to learn what they're good at and what they're bad at. So when they get to their supervisor, instead of asking, how does this assay work? They can say, in this assay that works in this way, this is a prominent challenge which I don't know how to deal with. Let's talk about it. So the system is trained in this way just on pharmacology, but you can invariably do it for anything. You can do it for anatomy, for medicine, for physiotherapy, whatever the case may be. It's trained on the South African NQF framework. So I've trained it to know that MSc is at a certain NQF level, honors at a certain one, and so forth. And it's trained in the domain of pharmacology. I didn't use any specific knowledge banks apart from our NQF documentation. So it's got open access to the internet because there's just too much diversity to try and narrow it down. But the aim here is for the student to provide as much as possible details on their project. So for example, they're an MSc pharmacology student. Their project involves looking at this plant extract as an antiparasitic element. In this study, they're going to be doing the following. They're going to be extracting and then testing some antiparasitic endpoints. So when you prompt the system now, it's going to immediately then start engaging with you. So because of acknowledgement and because we never want to bridge over that supervisory boundary, it reminds you that it's there to challenge your thinking, but it's not there to replace your supervisor or provide direct answers. So it immediately provides a preamble of what happens. Then it's going to ask you some questions. So for example, in your extraction method, what do you hypothesize about the types of compounds each solvent is likely to extract? On the antiparasitic assays, why did you select Schistosoma hemobotamium as the model organism? So this is Malaria. And on the characterization, how are you going to link specific things? So let's assume now as an entry-level student, I'm not entirely sure. So I'm going to provide answers and say, for one, water has more hydrophilic compounds and hexane more lipophilic. Lipophilic compounds may degrade the membrane more easily. For two, no idea. For three, what is LCMSMS? So questions or answers that might typically actually pop up during a discussion. I know some things, I don't know some things. So for the first answer, because I mentioned membrane degradation, it now starts to pose the questions about how does this happen? So once again, it's not providing an answer of you're correct or incorrect, because that would be a difficult vetting process, but it goes on further. With uncertainty, for example, it then starts to go a little bit backwards and say, well, if you don't know about this, let's think a little bit deeper about what you might know. So instead of going into the depth of schistosoma, it now starts to question a little bit more about the assay. And because you're unfamiliar with the techniques of LCMSMS, how are you going to start understanding this? And it's built in a way that once you say goodbye, it then gives you a score. So the scoring system, unfortunately, AI tends to suffer from psychopathy, so it tends to go a little bit more towards the positive side of things. So I don't think anybody would score this as a 6 out of 5. So that is still something that I'm trying to get a little bit better, that it is a little bit more ruthless, if I can put it that way. But it states what was done well and what needs to be done to improve. And once again says that these reflections should be taken to your supervisor. So it never tries to overstep that boundary. So we've rolled this out with some of our students, and their feedback to thus far has been that it's helped them to understand a little bit more of the nuances of their work. But they want direct answers, which is something I'm philosophically opposed to in this circumstance. But it's something that obviously everything can be discussed. This is something, once again, this took me about 40 minutes to build, with playing around a little bit here and there. Nothing dramatic, nothing that required programming, but it allows you some level of removal from that student discussion when your time is tight. It doesn't replace it, but it provides an opportunity for a student to at least continue the conversation to a higher degree and come with questions that are potentially much stronger, and allows them to engage with critical insights rather than just receiving instructions the whole time. Does the principle seem sensible? Any feedback that you may have, any opportunity you think that systems like this could aid your own supervisory consultations? So what I can say is that if ever you want to use any of these types of tools and play around with it yourself, I'm more than happy to share these prompts with you as well. I believe very much in open educational resources, so there's absolutely no proprietary blend to this. It's really a paragraph and a half about. So if you're interested, just pop me an email and I'm more than happy to share and soundboard that you can develop your own stuff as well. Moving away maybe from ChatGPT, just in the interest of time, on the topic again about learning about research and writing. So there's a couple of things you can do to help really elevate the way in which you do a writing activity or provide, once again, some level of independence with your students. So I'm just going to, sorry, there's one more thing that I want to show you with ChatGPT. Students naturally, when they write, they don't necessarily write the most amazing things at the start. We do sometimes get incredible writers for students, but sometimes not amazingly well. So something that I've done with some of my students is when they really want high-level feedback and I don't have time, I give them a prompt such as this, which is I am a researcher in the pharmacology department. My research is about establishing a non-2 numerogenic spheroid model. I've written the following protocol. My apologies. Assist me with the following, but be brief in your responses. Be constructive in your responses, but do not sugarcoat them. I'm here to be challenged, here to learn. Critically assess my literature review. Is my research aim aligned to my project and are my methods experimentally sound? So I've given it a little brief about what the research is supposed to be about. And now I'm just going to upload the protocol into it, and it's going to provide me with a response. So you can see this is an activity the students can do. And if you design your sessions well, you can actually make this an accessible learning activity as well. So it's going to read my document and provide me with some feedback. So as a strength, it says that I've got solid rationale and I clearly explain the role and challenges. But the weaknesses are, the weaknesses are that I haven't contextualized why I'm using the cell line. I've mentioned some things, but I don't discuss it properly. So from a weakness point of view, it seems that this protocol really doesn't delve into the depth thereof. There is alignment, but there is some issues with the wording that can be improved upon. And in terms of the method's experimental soundness, there's some strengths, but then there's also a lack of reproducibility, time point justifications are missing, the use of the assays are not rationalized, and so forth. And then it provides actionable items to improve. Now, what I've done, and this was more within a formative domain, we didn't provide marks for anything like this, but if you provide your students with this, and this is, for example, within a course-driven work, and you say, this first submission that you make to ChatGPT is also submitted for marking. And then using that feedback, you have to improve on it. Then you can do a pre and post assessment on it to see not necessarily whether or not the protocol is acceptable, but how did the change occur from the first to the second protocol? So you're assessing that jump within their learning and their writing ability that takes place. So it's not assessing necessarily the protocol quality, but it's assessing the change that can be implemented between versions. And this is a nice way to start getting into depth whether or not your students are actually changing their practices or actually growing as individuals. The hope that we have is we want to start doing things like this in incremental batches, not necessarily with protocols, but other mini assignments, so that in the long run, we can get programmatic data to show that if we look at the student from quarter 1 to quarter 4, their competency in various areas have changed longitudinally over time. So do you see the potential here for ChatGPT to support writing rather than take it over? And once again, with a clever research design, everything you do here, not that everything needs marks, by all means, not everything needs to be a full summative assessment, but depending on what your purpose is, there's always a way for you to build this formally into a system. Now, for the last couple of bits, I want to show you some external things from ChatGPT, some of them paid for, some of them not paid for. The first one being Research Rabbit. So Research Rabbit, let me just go to the homepage. So Research Rabbit is completely free. It is a, Research Rabbit is completely free. You just need to sign in, nothing complicated about it. And when you log in, you have the ability to upload PDFs and various bibliographies. So you can, for example, upload bibliographies from Zotero or as BibTeX, RIS, or CSV files. So for example, you can see that here's a collection called Nursing Neuropsychiatric Prescribing. So has anybody ever used Research Rabbit? Heard about it? Nancy, I see you know about it. So Daniel, you as well. So it's a lovely system. I've played around with it quite a few times for kind of local needs, but with proper implementation, this could really be a valuable resource when you start training your students on literature reviews, because Research Rapid affords itself that opportunity to become a literature mapper. So if you upload literature within Research Rabbit, what happens is that you start seeing networks form between literature, the literature that you have, as well as the literature that you don't have. So for example, if we look at this article, The Basic Orientation of Nurses for the Administration of Psychotropic Drugs, we can go and look at similar work. And if we start looking at similar work, it starts to generate all of these nodes. So you can see there are green nodes and then there are blue nodes. The green nodes is literature that you've uploaded. So McCabe, McGuinness, all of these are within my bibliography. But Usala and Burma, Sequeira, Miyasaka are things that I don't have. But what this does show me is that in my article from Ribeiro, it links to Usala, which links to Burma. In doing so, you start to see a map forming of literature that could be used. For example, if we look at these nodes at the top, Santos, Bramnes, Roca, Ferragato, and Floyd all link up to one another, meaning that those references are probably very good on this topic because they interlink so well. If we look at some other examples and we look at similar work for there, you can see a little bit of a greater distribution of the work, seeing a lot more linkages form between them. And the same can be said for any other work that you start looking at. So if you, for example, have pivotal reading for your students, you say, this article by McKenzie is the one you should read for your specific thematic area. They can use that to help elaborate and find research which is associated within the domain that they're looking at. And in doing so, it helps them get a much more guided way of looking at research. Because let's face it, for a student that's new, just delving into a literature search becomes a horrible affair. So in doing so, it allows them a greater sense of structure and finding the better people that are linked to this. For example, you can then see Duxbury has published quite a few times on this topic, meaning it might be somebody worthwhile to use. Now, the nice thing about Research Rabbit is that it doesn't really extend beyond that. This is what it does. You can pop it into a timeline format. That's about the only bigger thing that it does. Shows you where on that timeline it spreads. Beyond that, it does nothing. So that's the joy of this. There's very little risk, in my opinion, of this being misused. Yes, you can argue that it might ease the way students find certain literature, but I would argue that that is possibly a strength of the system to guide them to get to the best possible literature and avoid all the superficial stuff that tends to saturate the market. What I do think there's somewhat of a concern to is other systems, and I'm not trying to say they should not be used, but this is where I think often the areas of risks come into play. So for example, with SciSpace, SciSpace is a wonderful system to compile literature. You can ask it to write things for you. So for example, you can ask SciSpace in its free version as well as its paid version. Obviously, the paid version just gets you a lot more. You can say that I want to write a literature review on the apoptotic properties of human. This is what my literature review is going to be on. And it then generates a framework for you on that. So for example, there's an introduction, a background, importance, and so forth. And the thing is, you can then always elaborate on this and say, continue writing without citations. And it will generate text for you on this topic. Now, this is where my concern comes in, because somebody that is junior with research has absolutely no understanding of whether or not that is vetted or not. It may ease a lot of work, But I would highly recommend that you don't give your students free rein in these things, that they just use it without thinking about it, because that can lead to a lot of ethical risk, in my opinion. It leads to learning impact as well. I do think there's space for it for people that naturally have gotten their stripes with this. They have gone through the mill, they understand everything about it. They literally just need something to assist them getting the job done quicker. But I think the argument for that is generally going to be weak within the postgraduate education domain. I think there's a lot worse impact on that at the end of the day. What I do feel, though, is a little bit more helpful is it can be a mechanism of summarizing information a little bit more. So within SciSpace, you also have the ability to chat with your PDF documents. So for example, I've uploaded 3 files here from some of my students that have published. And you can create columns that allow you some level of interaction with it. So for example, here from the articles, there's a too long didn't read column, which is a broad overview of it. There's a limitations column. There's a practical implications one, a results one, and you can add more columns. Within the free version, it's capped to, I believe, 5. But the nice thing about this is that it now provides you with a high-level overview of that specific thematic area. For example, the results of Fabian et al., these were the results. If we look at Nkube et al., these were the results. So if you want to get very quick, very detailed feedback on certain articles, this could be a very nice way for you to go about it. You can also upload all of these PDFs and say, what is the ideal size of a spheroid? Which is what these studies were about. And it will then go and analyze these documents to present you with an argument. So it does allow you to engage with the literature a little bit more effectively as a discourse medium. But once again, I would very much argue that this needs to be within an appropriate learning design. Otherwise, it becomes complicated and you possibly remove that interpretability from it. If a student doesn't know how to interpret literature, they may not be able to understand whether or not this is a correct interpretation or not. You can, for example, see the ideal size of a spheroid was answered here. Based on the fact that I was a co-author here, I know that this is correct information. I've checked it before. But in articles I haven't checked before, I then trust this information as is. You can do this as an activity, though, to tell your students, ask your literature base a bunch of questions, and then do it yourself, and then critique critique the AI system's ability to analyze the literature. And in doing so, you get a sense of their critical analysis of literature. But there is risk in it. The big thing for me, though, is that all of this is out there in the public. If you search for best AI tools for research, these are the ones that pop up. So my opinion remains that we should be training our students how to use AI ethically and making them understand where's that barrier for where things can go horrendously wrong for their own development. I think if we avoid doing that, we do run the risk of, unfortunately, them going in blind and not understanding at times what the potential detriments for them are. But I see I'm very much close to time now, so I'm going to stop talking.
That's amazing. I'm going to ask people if they've got questions. I mean, I'm sure they've got questions, but terrific. Lots of people saying thank you.
Yeah. If there's anything else you want to check out, you can also check out Notebook LM, which is a great tool, in my opinion. And then I've also popped SciSpace and Research Rabbit in there as well. But once again, Chiro can give you my details. I'm more than happy to share any of the prompting systems or soundboard, be a devil's advocate. I'm a technophile, so I always get excited when these discussions pop up.
Thanks so much, Werner. Yes, I think the more we talk to each other, the better it is in terms of building collaborative academic spaces. So we really, really, really thank you for taking time out of your incredibly complicated to share with us some ideas. And I think this is a space where we can keep the ideas going and share with each other how we're doing what we're doing and put those ideas out there. I want to thank everybody else for coming along too. I'm not sure that this thing will actually upload. Okay. I just wanted to remind people that on the 5th of August, which is next week, Tuesday, we're running a focus day on teaching and learning, specifically talking about things like people integrating AI into their daily lives, we have Professor Margaret Bierman from Deakin University in Melbourne, who recently gave a keynote at the ASME conference about 2-3 weeks ago. And she's speaking about daily use in health science education particularly. Then we have Professor Kevin Behrens from our Steve Biko Bioethics Center, who's engaging in exactly what Werner was speaking about now, which is what are the ethical components of how we train students versus getting students output. And how do we draw the line between what students are actually doing and the learning experiences we want them to have. And then we're very fortunate that Professor Hcse from UCT has agreed to come in and share the workshop that he did with us. He did with people at CHSE, again, on saying, what are the questions that we ask that our students are using AI to answer? And maybe we should be looking at different questions. So that's a brief taste of the focus day, and I'm hoping that everybody does sign up. There will be one more sign-up sheet sent out, so please watch your email for that. Any comments, any questions? Anybody specifically wanting to add to what we've done here? That's super. Werner, thank you very, very much. I'm going to be in touch with you. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the day, everybody. Thanks for coming.
All the best, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.